That's just one of the stories.
We have to start. It's 12 o'clock. Welcome, everybody. I'm Kesa Pikas, Director of the Museum and Visitor Center and the Research Library here in Bastrop. And we're going to welcome Ken Keslis again to the Uniquely Bastrop series. This one is entitled Ups and Downs. Ken will talk more about that. If you have a question, please chat with us in the chat box. And Ken, I'm going to make you the host.
All right, let's see what I need.
Take it away.
Okay. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Oh, wait a minute. Somebody already said that. It was the ups of times. It was the downs of times. I guess all communities' histories have ups and downs, but there was some dramatic ones in the section I'm talking about today. We left off with a major down. That was when Bastrop lost out to be the capital of Texas to what became Austin. And that ended in October 1839 with Bastrop's Edward Burleson leading an escort for President Lamar into the new capital where they had ceremonies. Austin was now a reality, and Bastrop was forced to assume a permanent role as a supportive neighbor of Austin 30 miles downstream, as opposed to having been the preeminent and farthest western town in Texas theretofore. An up, though, was that Austin's proximity brought to Bastrop an expanding and healthy climate economically, politically, and socially. This successful time that it lasted until mid-1842 became a high point in Bastrop's history prior to becoming a state of the Union. A report said that the settlements around Bastrop are in the most flourishing condition. An abundant crop of corn has been raised by the settlers, most important for a newspaper report. In a 12-month period before and after the founding of Austin, the town grew from only 40 houses to one of 400 to 500 people with 80 to 100 houses, a very dramatic increase. New resident James Nicholson said that the country is full of enterprising and persevering people. The timid and lazy generally return to the States. The town boomed as never before. Bastrop had general stores, hotels, the manufacture of hats, looms, spinning wheels, chairs, wagons, and so forth. There were also specialty businesses and various professionals. The period was especially marked by the proliferation of sawmills. There were 7 different ones active in the boom period between late 1839 and 1842. Of course, the trees were used to build the new town of Austin, as it was used to build houses as far away as the Rio Grande, San Antonio, and the Waco area. These trees, the forest, the Lost Pines Forest, had been from the beginning a primary resource. It was used, as I said, to build houses in the West and to create the first buildings in Austin. It also was used to they charged people to get the lumber that was mostly on city land for payment and taxes. They taxed them and they received the lumber sometimes as tax payments. Provided firewood for residents, offered in payment for school support, and as previously mentioned, the extraordinary effort to get the capital to Bastrop, where they offered all the trees that the city owned as a part of that incentive. The development in western portion of Texas led to a renewed interest in the navigation of the Colorado. They needed to get up and down in the easiest way possible between Austin and the coast. Businessmen from Bastrop transported goods downriver using flatboats and keel boats drawn by mules, poled by hand, or simply floated. Eventually, steamboat builders found a way to design a boat that would draw with a full load, only 18 inches to 2 feet of water. And most of the year, the river had that much water in it. Besides hauling lumber, these boats transported such things as hides, pecans, lumber, and other crops, as you might imagine. One enterprising person managed to float his keelboat downstream and then use sails and oars to bring it back up so it could be reused. Otherwise, they would tear them apart and sell the lumber. A small courthouse was used throughout the remainder of the Republic period that was built during this time as a joint venture between the city and the county, a practice that continued in several buildings over the course of a half century. The city and county also jointly built a jail, a monstrous building, 2-story, log construction that was 14 feet by 18 feet. Measure your living room and see what kind of a jail it was. The city council of Bastrop took responsibility for streets, and they required every white man aged 17 to 45 and every Negro, which would all been slaves, aged 16 to 50 to work on building and improving city streets. Here's a story of travel that was considered or might be considered a down and an up, and maybe for some of the folks in Bastrop a real down in the way it turned out. President Sam Houston was traveling to Austin, and he had to cross the Colorado at Bastrop. He was in a buggy. The buggy tipped over, and he almost drowned. His detractors said because he was drunk and couldn't swim out. But a slave named Sam Banks, owned by Eli T. Merriman, swam out, rescued him, and brought him back. A derogatory story in one of the Texas newspapers said that German merchant who owned a kind of a boarding house took care of him and nursed him back to health for 4 or 5 days and sent him on his way, at which point the president gave him a deed to a lot he had in Austin that he said it was worth $1,500. Later, the merchant found out that it was on the outskirts of town, only worth $25, but not just $25 in the poor Texas currency. The development of Austin led to the creation also of Travis County. This might be considered a down, but maybe it's an up, depending on how you look at it. But a great deal of the land from the current Bastrop Travis County boundary line was, for several current counties, part of Bastrop County. With the creation of Austin, they also created Travis County and took away most of the land that had been in Bastrop County and gave it to Travis County and other counties. This greatly reduced Bastrop County's territory, of course, and left it only slightly larger than its present size. An up worth mentioning is recreational events during the time. The residents engaged in hunting, horse racing, and I'm sure gambling that went along with it, dances and balls, swimming in the river, at least for the men who usually swam nude, attending weddings. Election campaigns became great entertainment events where the candidates passing out free liquor. And also the participation in church activities. The Methodists continued to be the primary church in town and usually the only one that was functioning regularly. Interestingly, their membership records indicated that they had at one point 4 African Americans among the members. They worshiped in a schoolhouse or stores until they constructed their own building later in the decade. A down worth mentioning is that there were still scrapes with Indians. Rarely did hostile Indians raid into Bastrop, but there were other encounters in outlying areas. Volunteers continued to gather in Minuteman fashion in times of crisis, went out to punish or fight or recover stolen articles from the hostile Indians, and then returned home from the encounters to their farms after the counterattacks. After becoming president in December 1838, President Lamar reversed President Houston's Indian policy of pacification. He believed that for Texas to grow and prosper, it had to kill or drive away most of the Indians in Texas. Lamar turned to Burleson and appointed him as commander of a new frontier regiment of the Texas Army, the only army at the time that served to the area west of the Brazos for protection. Burleson led many campaigns, including a celebrated one at Plum Creek. This event is worth some detail because it's such an interesting story. A large collection of Comanches, 700 or 800, it is said, marched down from the San Marcos area down to the coast, looting and robbing, and they went to a port and collected stuff out of the warehouses there, killing people on the way, and collected hundreds of horses that they were taking back to the hill country. The Texans found out about it, sent out the alarm, and agreed to meet at a place near Lockhart, Isham Good's cabin. Edward Burleson gathered 87 volunteers very quickly and headed for the 30-mile trip to Lockhart overnight. In addition, he had 13 Tonkawas with him on foot. They managed to run alongside the horses all the way to the battleground and had enough strength, these Tonkawas, to sprint the last few miles when the battle was about to begin. And one of the Texans one of the white guys that Burleson sent to tell that he was coming, he announced, this guy's name was Hutchinson Reed, he announced that they should wait because Burleson was coming with his men at a gallop along with 13 Tonkawas running alongside. I don't think any of the whites shared their horses on that long journey. The Indians, the Tonkawas, were given white armbands so they could distinguish them from the Comanches who they were going to attack. This is a share. This is a woodcut. I hope you can see it. This is as big as I can make it. Let's see. I don't know if I can make it any bigger or not, but it's a woodcut of, gosh, that's not very large. Kay, how do I make this bigger? Well, maybe I don't. Anyway.
Can you zoom? There's a zoom. Well, is it in Word?
Yeah. Oh, it's probably too late for that, though, isn't it? I don't know.
I think it's okay.
All right, you can see it. There's not that much to see. Let's try this. Yeah, you can kind of see that. So this guy with the umbrella and the top hat, it was reported by everybody. They had gotten all these goods from raiding the warehouse. One guy had a suit on that he buttoned up in the back, and so every account talks about this guy that opened up an umbrella and carried it with him. Well, the Texans routed them. Burleson and other experienced leaders worked to make sure that they did. The Indians, the Tonkawas, completely were successful. None of them were shot or killed. They all had horses to ride by the time the encounter was over. This is the only known photograph of Edward Burleson. And it's a rough, very rough photograph. I'll try to get back here. So Burleson, that's Burleson. And also and I swear to God, this is true. He had a faithful Indian companion who was the leader of the Comanche. And his name was Placido. He was so important in Texas that when they came out with the first Texas Almanac, they put this woodcut of Placido in there. He was a great friend of Burleson and always fought alongside him. Burleson helped him. Placido and his band helped Burleson, and they both hated the Comanche. Much more on that story would be fun to report, but they completely routed the Comanche, and this was a very telling event in Texas history because it broke their back. They never again sent a large body after the settlements. Only after that, only small groups would come stealing horses, maybe killing women and children, and engaging large numbers of citizens and soldiers who went after them as they did their raiding. The numerical superiority of the whites meant, as they soon discovered, that the Comanche could inflict limited damage, but could never ultimately win the battle. An up comes from Edward Burleson being elected vice president of Texas. He was a well-known frontier soldier, the hero of 30 battles, who was never known to retreat. It was said of him that every child knew his name in olden times, and his name was on the lips of praise wherever he went in the West. And his name meant protector to the women and children of the frontier. He became the most popular, important person in Western Texas and was elected by 6,000 plus votes to 4,000 for his opponent, who was the handpicked vice presidential candidate by President Houston. He was rough-hewn and didn't make speeches very well. Somebody said that about the longest speech he ever made was, "Come on, boys, there they are, and we will whip them." He presided, though, fairly over the Senate, which was his job as vice president. One time there was a period where there was an even number of senators because they had a vacancy, and he had to break many ties because the Houston forces were aligned evenly against the Western forces. And of course, he sided with the Western people and made President Houston very angry. Another big down came from beginning in 1842. The real downer was conflict with Mexico. Even though Santa Anna had surrendered to the Texans in 1836, he still had desires to take over Texas again. He sent 2 armies to raid San Antonio in that year. The first one, Burleson, showed up in San Antonio ready to volunteer as a private or to lead troops if the volunteers wanted him. They elected him as leader, but President Houston blocked him from following them into Mexico to try to get them to never return. The threat of the Mexican invasion, future invasions, though, led to a great deal of concern in the West, and it eventually led to the removal of the government from Austin. President Houston never really liked the idea of having the capital in Austin, and so he used emergency powers to move it to the city of Houston. It eventually was at Washington on the Brazos for a couple of years. Many were still fearful of the Mexican attack. People moved away. Austin began to dry up as a commercial center. It was said that the leaven of dissatisfaction had spread here among all classes to the extent never equaled in the country before. The Indian threat, with the fewer settlers around, increased, and Burleson was called upon again and again to scour the countryside to stop the hostile Indians. Even friendly Indians made trouble because whites in Bastrop would illegally trade with them. One report said there were women picking out cotton and many Indians lying around the Bastrop drunk. Consequently, such problems led the government to order the Tonkawa to leave the Bastrop County area and go west of the San Marcos River. Another down is of course, since Austin's economy heavily depended on governmental operations and the safety of the area, Bastrop's economy also went down. It was a depressing time economically and otherwise. In 1843, when Kate Earhart returned to Bastrop after being released from prison in Mexico, having fought a battle against the Mexicans, he's noted that the town was silent as the grave, looked very desolate. At my arrival, after nearly 2 years' absence, he said that men and women principally made their own clothing and shoes. We did have plenty of beef, pork, bread, and sugar, but that was all. Earhart also recalled that new arrivals ceased because of the prevailing conditions. There was a dearth of business activity. One report said there was only one store for dry goods, and this, upon the persons entering, was full of Tonkawas bartering buffalo hides, deerskin, moccasins, etc., for bottles of whiskey from the tipping shop. A downer, but with an interesting up to it, was that Houston also tried to remove the archives from Austin, which was really the land records. He did not succeed because the Westerners fought against him doing it, set up patrols to stop wagons that Houston sent to gather up the records. A boarding house keeper, Mrs. Angelina Eberly, fired a cannon when she saw him early in the morning trying to load up the records, called out the alarm, and the local residents stopped him and sent him packing without the records. Another down is that after Burleson's term as vice president was up, he was persuaded to run for president of Texas to succeed Houston, who was bound to not run. They could not have successive terms by the Constitution. So the election eventually became Westerners versus anti-Houston Easterners. The Westerners supported Burleson against the Eastern crowd who backed Anson Jones. In the end, the election probably turned up Houston's public support for Jones. He was angry at Burleson over a number of things, never did like him, especially those votes in the Senate. He declared for Jones, throwing his influence and the influence of his friends behind Jones, and no doubt caused Burleson to lose the election. Even at that, though, this was the closest presidential election that Texas ever had. Burleson lost by a vote of 5,668 to Jones's 7,037. Burleson carried almost unanimously the western counties, but Jones had the eastern counties, which were more populous. And that was a blow to the locals because he was, of course, their favorite son, and it would have been extraordinary to have a Bastropian as president of the Republic. I want to say that I want to end on the note with, I hope, a little bit of anticipation that there was a big up on the horizon that would put an end to most of the downs that they had experienced. And so that will be the next class. It will involve an upper of times. So I'm going to stop at that point, having rushed through this more than I'd intended, but if there are questions, Kay, I'll be happy to try to answer those.
See any? Not yet. Anybody have a question? That was really interesting. Thank you. I enjoyed that. So is it true that he had the umbrella?
Oh, the umbrella story with the Indians. Yeah, absolutely. They were, people wearing top hats, you name it. So everybody saw that and reported it. So the person that did that woodcut for the Texas Almanac was following the reports of probably everybody that fought in the battle.
What's the likelihood that Placido looked like that?
Oh, well, do we have any questions yet? I'll tell you a story.
No.
There's a story that John Holland Jenkins was given a daughter of Placido and a slave of Edward Burleson's as a wedding present. There is a woman who worked for the Jenkins family until her death in the 1920s. So she would have been and maybe 80 in her late 80s or 90s. But her name was, did I say her name was Aunt Puss? For some reason, my dad had a photograph of her. And John Jenkins once made a speech about her and Placido at the historical meeting. And he pulled out that woodcut and a photograph of Aunt Puss, and I swear they looked like the same person.
Wow.
Extraordinary story. I don't know if the story is true or not, but yeah, I think it was fairly accurate. I doubt they had any photographs of him, or maybe they did. I've never seen a photograph, but that woodcut is commonly used, and it's very fancified with him with the raven and all that.
Right.
Or a woodcock, whatever, a woodchuck. What's a wood?
Whatever that was.
Whatever that bird is. Anyway, so I think he probably did look like that. Obviously, he was dark skinned.
Right.
A very superior man, great leader. Yeah.
Okay. We still have a question. Just want to thank everybody for joining us. Quite a few people on today. I do want to invite everyone out in May. Every Saturday in May, we are hosting historic downtown walking tours. Ken's going to lead a couple of those, and another docent will be leading a couple other ones. So they're at 10 o'clock. They're free on Saturdays in May, and we'll see everybody next time.
Let me make
what's the next one, Ken? Does that?
Well, the next one is going to be the spoiler alert is the annexation of Texas into the Union was an extraordinary gift to Bastropians and all in Texas. So I'm going to start with that and then talk about the first few years following that. I don't have a name yet. I do want to say this. In a couple of weeks, the museum will have reprints of my first book. It's been out of print for quite a while. And so I've made enough to last till I'm dead, I think. So if you ever need one for a gift, or you never had a copy of it, this is better than the first volume because it contains additional information, about 10% more that I didn't have before. And I have been using that research, of course, for everything we have done to this point. So that's why I'm referring to the book at this moment, Bastrop County before statehood.
Thank you. And we did get someone to say thank you for the great stories, Jimmy Crouch. So you're welcome. You're welcome. We'll see everybody next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.